So co-parenting is an interesting topic, right? How to parent with someone who you want to be away from is interesting because just by virtue of wanting to be away from them, the last thing you want to do is then have to be with them. So it is one of those really hard things to do unless you make the decision that you're going to co-parent. So when you are deciding how to co-parent going forward, you always want to think about your child first and foremost. Is this how I want them seeing me speak to my ex? Do I want the child being the one to communicate between the two of us? Do I want the child to know or not know who's picking them up on Tuesday? Going into, the very personal side of my life, I am divorced and my ex and I are decided. We decided that we were going to maintain a friendship. We decided that we were going to co-parent, putting the children ahead of ourselves. That was not easy, right? There were times where he or I, or at various points, both of us wanted to just be like, oh, but the truth is we couldn't do that. And we couldn't do that because we made a decision that it was more important that our children grew up respecting both of us, loving both of us, and knowing that they could come to both of us without consequence from the other parent. And I think, right, maybe a little bit biased, but I think it worked well because I feel that I have two children who are happy, well-adjusted, and have a very open relationship and very open dynamic between me and their father. And that is something that didn't come naturally, and it didn't come by putting together a rule book and a playbook. It came by understanding that our children were going to be the focus, and we were going to make decisions for them, regardless of how it impacted or swayed either one of us. When you're building a parenting plan, you do want to look into the future. So you want to look at, do I want a nesting arrangement where the children are in a home and we're going in and out, if that's a possibility? Do I want the other parent to have free access to my home to be able to come and go and get the kids as they please? Do I want the children to have two sets of everything, one in each home, because they can't come back to my house when they're with the other parent? So when you're building a parenting plan, you have to think about not so much the days of the week and the hours on a clock, but if you're going to put together a playbook, you have to think about all those little nuances. Do I want this person to walk into my house and get Johnny's baseball bat because he left it here? Or do I want him to go buy a new baseball bat for Johnny? That's a choice, right? That's a choice you have to make. And that's a choice you and your significant other have to discuss. But at the end of the day, it's a choice that you and your significant other have to explain to Johnny, because Johnny's not going to understand why he can't just go get his baseball bat from the other person's house. So be prepared when you're crafting your parenting plan and your parenting playbook, that this is a conversation that as your child grows, you are going to have to, in many ways, justify. And that is something that a lot of people don't think about when they're sitting at that table initially. That's why I like to ask, well, what are we doing in 5 years? And what are we doing when they're teenagers? Because these are people who begin to have independent brains, and we have to deal with that. Now, communicating with your ex is, listen, who wants to do it, right? Like, who wants to do it? But we all have to do it because we made a decision to have a child with this person, like it or not. So to communicate with your ex, you have to look at a few things. You have to look at, how do you feel most comfortable communicating? If you have a domineering ex who's always going to talk over you, who's always going to have the final word, who's always going to be my way or the highway, you probably are not going to have effective communication in person or on the telephone. And again, your child is going to be watching how you two communicate. So you really want to notice what is ineffective communication or unhealthy communication. If your dynamic is such that one is going to domineer the other, you're probably better to communicate on text, by email, through the court app, whatever works to take away that personal conversation. If you are people who can communicate effectively verbally, that's always going to be the best way to do it, because again, you're showing your child how to work with someone else with whom you have a somewhat adverse relationship. Because as your child grows, they're going to learn what divorce is, why it comes to be, and what those dynamics look like, because they are going to have friends who are in a divorce situation. You want to set the model. You do not want to be the one that the friends are talking about because you're so adversarial. Parenting plans should be built on what works for your family. So if you know you work every Tuesday night shift, you should probably not fight for Tuesday night. That just makes sense. As your child grows, and this is a conversation I have all the time, and there are people in my life personally who I've had this conversation with as well. The parenting arrangement you make for Johnny when he's 5 is going to be very different than what Johnny tells you he's doing when he's 15. Because there does come a point in a child's life where they decide they're going to take some level of control. And that is an intact family and a divorced family. It just happens to be that when you're an intact family, it's a little less controversial because they're not choosing a parent. One of the things to remember is the children do not choose a parent. That's not what they're doing. Children, as they get older, much like adults, make decisions based upon their own need as they see it and their own comfort as they see it. When you're building that parenting plan, depending on the age of the child, keep in mind that that is going to change over time. And you can have it change one of two ways: with effective communication, fluidity, and both parties choosing to foster the relationship with the child, or through controversy, battle, and fighting, in which case you're going to polarize your child. And again, I'm going to take you through the personal scenario. My daughter, when we first separated, did not want to go with her father. She wanted to stay home with me. There was a lot of change. There was a lot of differences. We weren't fighting, but she was young and this was scary. It's a scary time for kids. We decided, my ex and I, that we were going to build her into that time with her father because it was the right thing to do for her. It didn't hurt her. We didn't rip any Band-Aids. We didn't force her into the backseat of the car. Police were not involved. We built it over time because he respected me enough to know that I was going to make her go and I was going to get her to that point. And I respected him enough to know he was never going to call the police and drag her out when she didn't want to go kicking and screaming. It's about mutual respect. And if you put your child first, then the child will benefit. When you're looking at creating your parenting plan, you do want to look at a calendar. You want to tell your children who they're going to be with on what day, but you also want to, first and foremost, prioritize your child. You do that by looking at what is their need, what is their schedule, what is your need, what is your schedule. And you and your spouse have to decide if you are going to effectively co-parent through communication or not. And either way is okay. But if you choose to not have a communication with fluidity, then you must build a plan that allows for very specific identifiers and times and communication styles to lessen the conflict that your child is going to see. If you have any questions, give us a call, Jersey Coast Family Law.